When the regime in Tehran hears something like, we are low-keying it, how does it interpret language like that?
I mean, frankly, I think that they think President Trump is all over the place and says too many things, and that he is not a good negotiator. Historically, the Iranians are famous for being amazing negotiators, and I think they're ratcheting up the pressure on him by making these huge demands over and above the deal that they say they're almost finalized with Oman on the Strait, on passage through the Strait, asking for reparations, asking for full withdrawal of U.S. troops from the region. Making just massive demands of the.
Looks like we may have lost our professor here. We'll try to reconnect with Professor Haykel as we consider what the president has said already. Quote, we are just watching Iran with its huge inflation and the fact that they have no money, unquote, saying that the U.S. naval blockade of the country was deepening the financial pressure. And of course, we know as long as that blockade is there, it's much more difficult for Iran to make money. They cannot start getting oil out of the country by train or pipeline very effectively. They need to keep the strait. That's why they're talking to Oman about creating this new order in which there are multiple lanes of travel through the strait, a negotiation that has not involved the U.S. Now, when you also think about the level of munitions that our country, has been managing, it also makes one wonder what the next moves might be, or maybe justify this last one by the president. As the Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg wrote to the major defense contractors, they had no more than 21 days to submit plans to drive significantly faster, more aggressive delivery schedules. That's from a memo obtained by the Washington Post. And as we reconnect with Professor Haykel, I wonder, Professor, if you can finish your thought there. And let me add the question. We hear a lot about 47 years. Yeah. How many of those 47 years was Iran preparing for this moment?
Okay, so I apologize for the earlier. I'm in the Middle East. I'm in a bad zone when it comes to the internet. Right. As I was saying, the Iranians are trying to rattle the president, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of doing that. And he has to be much cooler in dealing with them. As far as the Iranians and preparing for this, they have been. They're a revolutionary regime. They've been trying to spread their ideology all over the Middle East, and they were trying to build a nuclear weapon. They thought that a nuclear weapon was really the way to create deterrence and to protect their regime and its survival. They've discovered that actually controlling Hormuz is much more effective.
It's an interesting way of putting it here, that this waterway is more powerful in influencing the United States than the threat of a nuclear weapon. That said, why would Iran ever give this up? Why would it ever make a deal with the United States?
I think it also wants to sell oil, so it wants to find some sort of agreement on the reopening of Hormuz. But what it wants to do is toll it. I mean, it wants to generate revenue, and it wants to dominate and control its neighbors, and countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and so on. And this is one possible outcome of this war that has to be absolutely stopped. I mean, the Iranians cannot control this region completely, because they would have literally the entire world over a barrel. They would be able to control the global economy through oil and gas.
The world over a barrel. Someone's got to write that headline. Professor, Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the plan for Hamas to demilitarize, to disarm, and have Israel withdraw from Gaza. Could there ever be a deal with Iran without this component of peace between Israel and Lebanon?
Well, the Iranians want to actually bring in as many other theaters of war into this deal. They're trying to include Lebanon. They're trying to include Israel and Gaza. They're trying to include Yemen and Bab el-Mandeb, which is another theater of operation that may heat up very soon, and that would block passage of oil and other ships through the Red Sea. So the Iranians want to do this, and they have to be denied this. These are separate theaters of operation, especially in Lebanon, where they control the country through a militia, one of these proxy militias that they've developed. And they have them in Iraq and Lebanon. in Yemen and amongst the Palestinians. I think what Netanyahu's trying to do is also try to tell President Trump, but mainly for electoral reasons, because he's up for elections later this fall, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and he doesn't want to, basically concede anything to Hamas, because if he does, he looks weak, and that's not good for electoral support.
Yeah, right. So what is this phase that we're entering here, Professor, as the president refers to? We're low-keying it, semi-negotiations. Do we just churn like this for weeks or months at a time?
It's possible. No war, no peace. And, everyone at the beginning of this war was predicting a barrel of oil at 150 to 200 because of the major disruption that Hormuz represented. It turns out that didn't happen, partly because the U.S. is such a major producer now, also because the Saudis and the Emiratis were able to ship some of their oil through their pipelines away from Hormuz, away from the Persian Gulf, and also because the Chinese played a big role in decreasing their demand for imports. So all of that combination led to a spike not happening. Now, the big question, I think, is going into the end of the summer and into the fall, if this continues, will we see a spike? Or will, U.S. production and Chinese behavior and the Red Sea remain open so that we don't see a spike? And I think that's really the big question that remains unanswered.